Hello and welcome to Manchester Poetry Library. Just a very brief introduction from me. I'm Becky, the director here, and we're delighted to have both Helen Mort and Glyn Maxwell with us tonight. Just to say, we don't plan to have a fire alarm. So if there is one, it's just out the building with the main porticoed entrance that you came in. And we just congregate by the park. And the toilets are just out of the main doors here and on the right. While you're here this evening, do help yourself to a drink. And Helen will tell us more about this series of 3 events that Helen's helped us curate. And just to remind you, we're a public poetry library. I recognise quite a few faces of people who've been before. If you haven't, come and see one of us at the back towards the end, and you can become a member, take out 10 books at a time. You actually don't have to bring them back for quite a long time unless somebody else wants it. So it's quite a nice deal there. I'm going to not waste any more time and just pass on to Helen.
Thank you, Becky. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. Welcome to the first of a 3-part series on poetry and environment. It's supported by, as well as the library, by the Poetry Research Group and the Centre for Place Writing. My name's Professor Helen Mort. I'm a Professor of Creative Writing here, and I'm going to shortly introduce our first guest, poet, librettist, playwright, tutor, prolific Substack writer and soon-to-be psychotherapist, Glyn Maxwell. I'll do that in a bit, and I'll explain the format of this evening. But as this is the first event, I wanted to say a few words about theme and the kind of the theoretical concepts behind this series on what I've been variously calling poetry and environment, eco-poetry, misusing all the terms horribly, no doubt. So the Centre for Place Writing Research Group here at Manchester Met explores the connection between writing and all aspects of environment, including issues like climate emergency, urban regeneration and migration. And across genres, my own work is heavily preoccupied with place, particularly the tidal waves of gritstone rock that surround my childhood landscape, the moors, reservoirs, rivers and hills of the Peak District. And as such, I've often heard myself called a nature writer, or sometimes even an eco-poet. And those labels can sit uncomfortably, I think. I write under the heavy influence of Norman MacCaig, the Scottish poet, famous for his capacity to playfully evoke the character of animals and place, but deeply mistrustful, if that's the right word, of his or anyone's ability to do so. So his succinct animal poems, drafted in the time it took him to smoke a couple of cigarettes, apparently. That's how he always used to describe his process. How long does a poem take? It was like about 2 cigarettes. He praises the way a collie moves like a piece of black wind, how a seal struggles in the straitjacket of its own skin, how a cormorant stands on a rock and unfurls its wings like a man proving to his tailor how badly his suit fits. When he writes about a goat, he wants to capture its pure goatishness. When he invokes a heron, it, quote, makes an absolute exclusion of everything else by disappearing in itself. MacCaig does not trust his own facility with metaphor. He said once, "I'm growing as I get older to hate metaphors, their exactness and their inadequacy." He also said, even more grumpily, "I loathe the pathetic fallacy. Makes it rain when you feel sad, makes it sunny when you feel gay. I loathe burdening outside objects with human feelings, making them some kind of sympathetic translator for my tiny, small self." I think the twin problems of anthropomorphism and its kind of even grander cousin, anthropocentrism, sit at the heart of what we call nature poetry or even eco-poetry, and we kind of squint at them through the cage of our own language and our own hapless embodiment. If writing can be a means, these are the questions that have guided this series, I guess. If writing can be a means of empathy, then can it be wrong to try and evoke the more than human through the trappings of our own humanity? How might we do otherwise? Can we? If a tree wrote a poem about Philip Larkin or Paul Muldoon or Robert Frost, what would it sound like? Is it hypocritical to pose such questions? How can I claim to really love something, a rock, a leaf, a gritstone edge, and yet presume to speak for it? What is love if not a terrifying encounter and reconciliation with the otherness of the other, veiled in an attempt to find common ground? These are the things that always bother me when I'm writing animals and place. Glyn Maxwell has gifted us compelling theories about the poem's work, the work of the poet, and the lyric eye over many volumes, most notably in his acclaimed On Poetry in 2012, and more recently in the ways he's been using platforms like Substack to democratise and liberate creative writing. He's published multiple poetry collections with Picador, won the Geoffrey Faber Memorial Prize and Somerset Maugham Award, to name just a few, blah, blah, blah. Like when you get to poets like Glyn, you're just like, yeah, they've won all the prizes, they've published a lot of great work. More recently, he's been writing and sharing 101 extinction songs on Substack, promoting conversation about loss, ecology, and endangered creatures. And I think that's what he's going to be reading from tonight. And I'm really interested in the subtle ways that these extinction songs recognise McCaig's disdain for the tiny, small self, showing the scale and scope of the more than human, while also addressing the difficult fact that the self is never small in the eye or the lyric eye of the beholder. What happens at the intersection of human ego and eco, since we cannot escape ourselves and our own songs and our instinct to make song? So Glyn is going to read for about half an hour, and then we'll have a conversation on stage, and then if there's time, we'll open up to audience questions at the end. And I think he's also got some books available. So I'm going to be quiet now. You'll be very relieved to hear. I'm going to hand over to Glyn Maxwell, so please give him a very warm welcome.
Silky Shifaka. Why didn't you bloody tell us you were Silky Shifaka? Why didn't you ever say about your black eyes and soft white fur? Why didn't you say your little arms went halfway round a trunk and you just clung there for dear life? Who wouldn't have been shrieking, "Cling on for dear life, Silky," if you'd ever thought to tell us you were Silky Shifaka? Why didn't you say you mate on only one day of the year, at the top of the rainy season? I'd have said that to the driver. And what the hell does that mean? She'd have gone and looked at me with her black eyes and soft white fur and little arms that went halfway around the world. And from the other half of the world I maybe would have said, "Oh, nothing." Why didn't you explain you needed rosewood to thrive in? We would have carved a whole park from rosewood. In fact, we have. And here we are at Rosewood Land. Where are you? We've driven here. Why didn't you explain you needed rosewood? Sorry. Where are you? We've driven here with all our loved ones in the back to see you in your millions. Where are you now, Shifaka? Have we wasted our long journey? All our petrol? All our word games? Why didn't you ever cry your cry of Shifa, Shifa? We would have all joined in. We would have taught it to our kids, who would have made their own Shifaka toys from tie and beanie babies, cry Shifa, Shifa from the back seat. And in good time, we would have gone, "Christ, cut it out!" but seen them in the mirror still mouthing Shifa. It's really nice to see you all. Thanks, Helen. That was a terrific, just thought-provoking introduction. And it's nice to have Norman McCaig in the room. It really is, because already I agree and thinking about it. So I wrote these 101 poems in the second half of last year. It was a strange dare to myself. It started out as an aesthetic thing about stanza form and imprint, and what is stanza form if it's not imprint, like a creature imprints on the ground or the air or the water. And I thought, well, this is the challenge. Let's try and write poems poems concerning the 101 most threatened creatures as determined by the Zoological Society of London in 2012. So what's good about using a list from that long ago is that some of them are gone already forever, and some of them are there's been some impressive work to save, to conserve. So there's a gap of time between this list and these poems, which allows for that. So I thought let's start investigating to write concerning them. What's missing from that is the preposition. Was I going to write about them? Was I going to write for them? Was I going to write with them? Was I going to write in their voices? And there's all sorts of things I didn't want to do, or had been done better by other poets, Les Murray, D.H. Lawrence, McCaig, and so on. So I went into it thinking, I just want to do this because I want to write poems again, and I'm going to write them with these creatures in mind, these disappearing creatures on my mind, and see what happens. And so here's some of the ones that happened, and we can talk about the different ways they happened. But I thought next I'd do one that appears to have gone forever since the list was made. The Galapagos damselfish. This is from a book. In 1982, the strongest El Nino ever recorded created a huge pool of hot water around the Galapagos Islands. No one ever saw the Galapagos damselfish again. This references something that Prospero says in The Tempest about when he retires back to Milan, every last thought will be the grave. Azurina eupalama. Only if you dream of Azurina will you forget what's waiting as you wake. For if you think of Azurina, every thought is nothing but the third thought of Prospero. And if, like me, you write of Azurina, then I wish you luck, not seeing with your own eyes how it ends. For we all know where human creatures look when told where not to. You're looking now, and only if you dream of Azurina will you forget what's waiting. This is called large-toothed sawfish. The large-toothed sawfish has this enormous razor thing that is called a rostrum, and it's being hunted to extinction largely for that, so it's cut off from the body. Large-toothed sawfish. Stop, crop, shark fin soup, oil of my liver, trophy, scoop, traditional medicine, prize on the wall, prop. It's a rostrum, what you call a saw. It's the pride of the market, nailed to a stall. I was known as the common sawfish, lol. Spikes on the ankles of battling cocks, beauty, religion, longer sex. Time for my mugshot, crop me, do. Crop so I seem to be smiling at you. Crop me, leave only my eyes and my smile. That's not where my eyes are, that isn't a smile. But go ahead, crop, till the saw's not there, till I look like your neighbour, shorn of her hair. These poems were written from summer of last year to New Year's Eve. I was trying to get them all done, and I think it was subconscious when I began that project, but it became increasingly conscious that I was trying to create the conditions of darkness coming and being in a hurry, and having to hurry and get them done. And it got very dense and crowded towards the end of the year. And as darkness came in all sorts of ways, this includes the time of, all the wars that are going on. I don't need to enumerate. It also includes the American election. And so I was writing through these with these things on my mind. But this one is mercifully not about that. This is called Sakhalin Timon. It's about a fish. Sakhalin made me think of Chekhov, which is where he spent a long time as a young doctor treating the prisoners who were imprisoned on the island. And there's and it made me think of Uncle Vanya and the long speech that Sonia makes at the end of Uncle Vanya, which is an extraordinary testament to hope in the face of the opposite. My poor, poor Uncle Vanya, you are crying. she says in that speech. So there's lots of that speech in this. You can probably tell those bits from the bits that are me. Sakhalin Taiman. I will never stand on the dock at Sakhalin in the fading light and watch you, Uncle Stringfish, shimmer near the surface. I will never see you, will I, ever? Though my mind is water for you now, as clear as any you'll ever know again. I will never do the good he did, that doctor who drinks in the fallen night and tries to spot you, Uncle Stringfish, nor could I write the words he's still to write. What can we do but live? Live through the long procession of days and work for others without rest. The fate of each and every soul I know is to think the utmost solace beyond reason, but not imagination. When the hour comes, God will have pity on us, Uncle Stringfish, so we shall see that bright and beauteous life where we are gone, and we shall know our kind is safe in the world we knew. Uncle Stringfish, when you meet the surface, try to make me out on the wooden jetty lapped at by the dark. I'll stay a while here, but I'll be gone before you, is my promise, along with when she says, we shall rest, Uncle Stringfish. We shall rest. We shall hear the angels. We shall see all evil sinking down below in the great compassion that shall enfold the world. What should be done to save you is as likely to be done on earth as what should save me. Not should do, nothing should do. I just mean as likely, Uncle Stringfish, or as likely as that you'll find me on this dock at twilight, watching you out there in the dark water. For long enough, I go to bed believing you will be out there always. The last time I came to Manchester and the time before, it was to be part of University Challenge, which was something I share with my hosts. And there are a couple of the 101 of the species are familiarly, I mean in English, known as Attenborough's something. So this is one of them, Attenborough's echidna. And echidna is a kind of porcupine-looking thing. This one is incredibly rare, and it was named long ago, in 1961, which is almost roughly when I was born, for Attenborough because of his documentary work in what was then called New Guinea. I mean, how much of a CV can you have? It was in his honour. So this considers just why things are called things. And I mentioned University Challenge because it's mentioned in there. But it's also about that sort of Attenborough spirit, I suppose. And it's about there being only one of something, and it's hardly ever seen. Attenborough's echidna. A world from there, but roughly then. I too was the only one they ever found. Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, tick, 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 my tribes, but only one of me. Although I don't become a spiny ball when I feel threatened, do I? No, don't say. And though I'm not nocturnal in the way they mean, outside it's dark when I do this, and I mean always. Also, I've gone by now. That's quite echidna. And though I've not been hunted down and killed to share with enemies as a peace offering, there is still time. Only last year they caught us both on film. It scuttling through the forest on a trail camera. Me in an early round of University Challenge. Worcester, Maxwell. I wished my dad could see me. One of my friends from the Garden City said I'd finally made it. I haven't changed the subject. Television named this little creature. Mind you, there's no day of your life you can't make better by imagining the gentle voice of David whispering as you pass, wholly attentive, curious, wise, delighting in your foibles, and by his wonder, lifting your poor self into the lists of the marvelous. This one is about a heron. I'd have probably included it, even if it wasn't for the fact that the heron's sitting there, but I had to have a heron involved. Even if it wasn't endangered, I'd have included it for Helen, but... Helen is extensively writing about herons and just told me over a drink that herons, they're associated with many things, but among them are drunkenness and oblivion and the Grim Reaper. So that's just a trailer. Anyway, this is a poem that actually does embrace all of that. There is a sort of time-passing notion about these poems. So this mentions Halloween, so it's sort of towards the end of the year. Obviously, it includes the election, it includes the run-up to Christmas and so on, and the end of the year, because along with the nearing extinction or possible extinction of these creatures, there's also one personally aging. So there's extinction as a thing one is also that we all are facing, and maybe it was time to write about it. So that's mixed in as well with whatever's happening politically or globally. COVID taught us to think personally, locally, nationally, and globally, and spiritually in the same sentence. So I haven't lost that. White-bellied heron. There was an age my kid and her mates had reached where you wanted to turn your back, but you really couldn't. One Halloween, and Halloween wasn't scary for them anymore, it was scary for us. Not far from the party house, ablaze with light, was a deep pond. Her mother had asked, would I mind standing by, in case the odd party-goer of the wasted kind came wandering by in the mist. So I went down there with a litre of Garvey and damp little floral deck chair to keep my vigil. Oh, the places you'll go, and so on. Nobody came. They went on having their fabulous do I couldn't go to because I was sat by this wrinkling pond in my early 50s. I was probably only there for an hour before I said, sod this for a game of soldiers. One thing I remember was a thin black silhouette on the far side of the pond. A heron. Oh, I'll tarry a while, I cried. We shall guard our young together. And I felt her stillness. Her gravity implied a deep accord. Soon it implied the thing was made of iron and never leaves that spot. I see the real thing fly away now. I name it one of the less than 300 white-bellied herons of the Himalayas left. It left its statue keeping watch. If you pass that way one Halloween, you'll see mine too, on its low throne of iron bottle raised, all rusted in the moonlight. Who knows? It may snap you out of what has brought you weeping to the water's edge when you can't face the dancing. I hope so. This was written kind of 48 hours before the election in the States. It's called Rio Pescado Stubfoot Toad. And which is has been described as the worst disease to impact biodiversity globally, and it's killing off an awful lot of frogs and toads. Chytridiomycosis. Chytridiomycosis. Through water, skin to skin, shits up your keratin. Redness, ulceration, electrolyte depletion, loss of flight response, lethargy, imbalance, confusion, heart attack. You are not going back. What else? Shortness of breath, early death. Mrs. Toad is terrified. She makes a start on the dirty plates. Her husband wears his hat with pride. Kai Trio making Stubfoots great. He's having a beer outside. Still neck and neck in the swing states. I wrote this poem on the morning of the 6th of November. I don't know if I think that's the morning after the election when it was clear what had happened. It was roughly my birthday, so it was either this day or the one after. The next creature, I kept to the order that I'd randomly generated because I just wanted to do that. I wanted the creatures to come towards me and not for me to choose them. So the next one was a snail that only had its Latin binomial, Hemicycla paetiliana. It didn't have an English name. It didn't have a familiar name. I called it the rainbow snail because I found a beautiful picture of it in which it had all sorts of colours. And and I suppose, well, rainbow for obvious reasons on the morning after that, the election. So this is the rainbow snail. There's barely a thing about it, and there's no name I can find, except the one I gave it. When I started, all I saw was a lovely thing that went along the silence, and a hope I had words to bear us both. It just thrives in its stone of colour, and it's moving, look, it doesn't know what's happened in the world. If it did, I would comfort it, but it's got no need of comfort. Gold and red and blue and grey, I shall hold it like it's there. Bury me with the last one left and start again somewhere. Around the same time, there's this one, Woolly Spider Monkey, where the epigraphs is slightly longer than the poem, but that's okay. I really, when my students do that, I just say, don't do that, but I end up doing everything they do that I criticise. Woolly Spider Monkey. So what it says is, one of the few primates that has tolerant, non-hierarchical relationships among and between males and females. Group aggression is also rare. And this is from a paper called Low Paternity Skew and the Influence of Maternal Kin in an Egalitarian Patrilocal Primate. And there's a list of scientists' names from Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Oh, and they weep, we meant to say. They tend to weep when they're upset. We didn't put that in the paper we presented in our habitat on account of all the creatures here who will, on hearing that some will weep when they're upset, soil themselves with pleasure. And the next thing that came into view was a very beautiful purple bird called the Fatu Hiva monarch. And I wrote this children's story about it. I mean, it's a poem, but it's about a brother and a sister. A glossy purplish bird on a rainy day was nestled in the toy box. A little girl ran in. She had in mind a game which had a bird in. As luck would have it, as the pouring rain just kept on through the morning, her hand in the toy box, scrabbling, found the bird there, upside down and perfect. She placed it where the game began, and the angels gathered round. If the language can't have that, it can't have anything. As it was, you can't have anything, was just what her big brother had in mind when he blazed in from the toilet, sat where she was kneeling, and pounded in the toy box till a black rat and a monster cat were in the game that for the girl was over and also never ends. The black rat ate the bird. The girl said, no, the bird escapes. The cat, though, the boy points out, that killed it next. His sister told him, no, she flies away. He snatches it and hides it, and she said, that isn't her. He stares, bites it in his fury, and she whispered, that's a toy. He runs to get the door, hurls something to the rain, and cries the words, it's gone forever, no returns, making the sign that means it, but she said, she's singing in my mind. So he shouts, and if that doesn't work, he hits her, and if that doesn't work, he screams and runs away. When he comes back later, shoving through the ministering angels all around her while the language has them, he says, I rule the world now, including games. Red River, giant soft-shelled turtle. Follow the living stone down the same river you stepped in twice. She may or may not be the last, but she will never meet your eyes. You have slung so much of your stuff in this yellow river, it won't survive. It or your shit, do you mean, oh Johnny Lately? You did your best. Shored up your ruins against your ruins nightly, largely pissed. Here you've been trying to save a world that lately came to bits. All the king's horses are on their way. They are always on their way. It's where we started, men in their massive hallways standing by. Where are the women in this? You are sobbing always. Where are they? For the men in the pay of the men, it can only be tomorrow. The living stone never once did harm. It's a lonely thing being sorry. Follow it out of this life, my one and only dance hall Johnny. And then here's Attenborough again. This is a plant called Attenborough's pitcher plant, Nepenthes attenboroughi, and it's a remarkable looking thing. The plants, the blossoms, look exactly like pitchers full of green liquid. That's just the shape of them. It's extraordinarily beautiful. And so I epigraphed this with a little of our favourite King James version. And Adam gave names to all cattle, and to the fowl of the air, and to every beast of the field. Attenborough's pitcher plant. Call it for him, he loves it. Call it for me, for I was the man gave names. Tell me the human soul who can see that plant and see anything but a drink held out for him to drink, and I mean him, and the drink is drunk by now, went down in one. How do I feel? All good, for I was the man gave names. I will find the woman in the dark wood to tell all to. Now all is all I know. Though once it's told in the dark wood, there's nothing. When all is told, there's nothing. Then there better had be love, for I was the man gave names. And if there's no one close enough to hear the names, what then? Then the long wait for the one to whom I weep. The snake beguiled me, and I did eat. The dusky gopher frog only exists in two ponds around Jackson, Mississippi. They're called Glenn's Pond and Mike's Pond. I know that just sounds like a couple of blokes who have ponds, but that's actually what they're called. Glenn's Pond and Mike's Pond. That's the only place they can find the dusky gopher frog. Interesting things about the dusky gopher frog, it was talked about in the Supreme Court. It went to the Supreme Court. And the other thing about it is that it's the only frog that has the capacity to do this when it's afraid. And it does this. Dusky gopher frog. Nothing is going well. But here they are, trembling here until they leap. And if they leap, they land and look. And there they listen to the silence, which is never silent, never safe, is always closing, always coming, always closer, and takes the form of light so bright, their only course is to keep going. Nothing's going, nothing's safe. You won't believe me, but they went to the Supreme Court. They didn't, their case went there. Guess what? It lost. Of course it lost. Just listen to the judgment, take the form of light so white, all grace is gone. These creatures raise their hands like our hands to shield their eyes like our eyes. And then to move away from the darkening clouds slightly, there's a poem I'm not going to read this evening, but it was around Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving, which obviously is late November with the election having been early November. And I was trying to think what I was thankful for. And all I could come up with was my daughter, my granddaughter, that Christmas was coming, and some news about a plant, the plant I was writing about, the Tana River euphorbia in Africa, which had been saved by great community conservation efforts, and now looks safe. In that poem, I'd written, "For I think there's a place, I will see your face, where the light is bliss, my daughter." And my daughter read that and asked me what I meant by it. So I wrote this poem called West Australian Underground Orchid. And it's me trying to explain what I mean by thinking I think there's a place where I'll see her face. And it's in tiny little tercets, short line tercets, 3-line stanzas. But they all are punctuated with a full stop, and they just stop and there's a break. So it's against natural punctuation, but I thought maybe I'm trying to imagine a heavenly place, or a place that's so other that its punctuation is strange. It's different. West Australian Underground Orchid. I only mean I think my mind will find the place. And time will come to close it down and find itself, welcomed in to take the weight off its old legs. Old friend from school who can't believe there's nothing here for him to help with, so he's sat there telling jokes. Time will tell, he goes, is that the time? Time, gentlemen, he'll get a beer, we'll save his spot. And all the folks we've written down, and all the folks we haven't yet, but we'll all be there somewhere. And I'll be there the day I go, and all the days. I only mean, I think my mind will find the place. And every hour you planned a thing for everyone. Everyone will do the thing you planned for them. Like in my life, you planned the parties just that way. And said where people sit and people sitting there will get along like anything. Then comes a sign to move along. All change they go, and as they go, this miracle pink orchid from the underworld will suddenly grow everywhere, and everyone will see the rosy light delighting every face. I only mean I think my mind will find the place. And you can say, my dad still had these 23. Creatures left to do. He picked this one for me. I'm just going to do two more. This was very near the end of the year, so this is like around Christmas. I'd been seeing my old friends from my hometown, and I woke up in a, what's it called, Premier Inn. And wrote this in a Premier Inn hungover, and it's about my liver. And it's, but the next creature coming along was Nelson's small-eared shrew, which was a bit irritated at having been the subject of this poem. Anyway, his name is Cryptotis nelsoni. Clues in the word. It lives. Do you get it? You certainly don't behave like you get it. You do in the morning. You promise you'll quit. Then you promise you'll cut down, or will in a bit. But the sun has its promises too, which it keeps. While you're in a boozer, abandoning yours, like they never were made. Mr. Bones, there are laws. And the whispering angel ain't telling it straight, for she's not even there, and it isn't that late. But hurry up, please, it's time, it's time. What if I came as the work of your day, like a Nelson's small-eared shrew, let's say, and said, yes, I'm small, and I have small ears, but I hear you've been doing this shit for years. And who has that many? We don't. So I'm thankful you thought of our plight, or you sort of thought of our plight. It is good to be thought of. I'm thinking of yours, sir, and you are most welcome. That's all. Happy holidays. Best wishes. Nelson, the small-eared shrew, Cryptotis nelsoni. I just arrived in my Premier Inn. It was just a letter. It just arrived. And I'm going to finish with this one. So I woke up on the morning of the 21st of December at 4 a.m., which happens sometimes. I think it was because I knew I had to finish these poems. And I thought, oh my God, it's St. Lucy's Day, which just reminded me of the John Donne poem. And I thought, I've got to write it, whatever the next animal is, I have to write it in that structure because of the clock, because of the time, because of the form. And it was the leaf-scaled sea snake. And I thought, that's what I have to do. There's no question. This is a helpless act. So I wrote leaf-scaled sea snake. So it's that John Donne poem. It is the year's deep midnight, and it is the days. So it references throughout the fact that it's the shortest day, the longest night, and only good things can come after that, which obviously thematically ties in with what the hell else has gone on in that 6 months. Leaf-scaled sea snake. I have ages. was the phrase that came to mind 4 hours into the shortest day, a time there'd be no light for ages. I'm awake and clock the date and find the only path to take. Dunn's, Lucy's, this, for the endangered snake to haul me to the new year. Help me make my number. How poetic, how, come on. If ever there's a helpless hour, it's this one. I can only start again, can only rise to trail these footprints through the, wait for it, darkest night, can only fit this creature to its ears and eyes. Oh, go on, you do you. That's what they say. Do what you said you'd do before it's gone, before the sky goes blue on no one's watch, and something saves the day you don't believe, but sing for anyway. Your form cannot be freer than your life, is all I know. And all you need is love, what I was fairly certain of. Still am. The farmer wants a wife, makes up the list of 3. This Christmas, daughter, granddaughter, and me will light the world we find. See what I see. I am the man gave names. Know what I know. The worst have come. The world is touch and go. Ride the Ouroboros round and round. You're not sure why you're dying out. I am. Coral bleaching. Give a damn. Sign a memo. Make a sound. The morning sky is black. The men have voted. We're all going back. You hoped for better? Then you'd better pack before the bleaching starts in earnest. Friends, the book you shut could tell you how it ends. The lights below the bridge are green. The lights below the bridge are pink. I loved it here. I am the man held strangers dear, somewhat literally some nights. The sky is faintly blue as I tap these words. Did what I said I'd do. St. Lucy, done, nocturnal. You do you. Let something bless us somehow on this day. I do is what I took these hours to say. That's it.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. And I think I've got my microphone to work, which is a bonus. So I'm going to ask some questions of Glyn now, and then we're going to open up to audience questions at the end. And I've got about 1,000 questions, some of them about process, some of them about subject. We won't get through them all. But I thought I'd start with a nice, easy one, which is a poem alive? It's a really easy warm-up question.
So I've got to keep the mic away because of all the cursing I'm doing. Yeah, I have to say yes, because it's really the foundation of the way I teach it is that poems should be creaturely. So if I believe that, which I do, then the language is telling me I think poems are alive. To say the least, they outlive people. Yeah, poems are alive. Yeah.
I've got a follow-up question to poems. No, I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm really interested in the conditions of writing those pieces. And I think you said that you kind of created conditions of urgency and hurry to kind of replicate the sense of urgency that we might have about biodiversity loss and extinction loss. How did that influence the way you were writing them, apart from the obvious kind of, I'm thinking of myself in this position, the kind of anxiety of, can I actually do this? Is that something that you'd tried to do before, that kind of pressure to finish something and that self-imposed deadline, and how did it play out in the way that you wrote them?
I don't think I had done it quite like that before. I've had some really tough deadlines but when things have been commissioned, like theatre and stuff, when I really had to get things done. No, this was a tough self-imposed one. I think once I realised I was in this for the long haul, I was doing this fairly diffidently through May and June and thinking, how am I going to write about all these creatures? I don't want to try and do Les Murray. I don't want to try and speak for them. How am I going to do it? And it sort of started to take focus. And then around October, November, I'm thinking, I've actually got to write virtually one every day at this point. So the pressure became part of it. And I realised it was it was about darkness encroaching, and the world had got dark, as dark as I've known it, to be honest. And I thought, this is going to pressure poems out of me because I can't fail. I have to get these done. And of course, a lot of them don't work at all. And you know, I've got a bunch that work okay. So I thought, just ride the pressure, ride it to New Year's Eve. Just get it done. What else are you for? You know, if you set up as a poet, what as Dylan says, like, what good am I? If you're set up as a poet, you know, do it.
Yeah, I always kind of love commissions, because even the ones that when you're working with material that you wouldn't choose, and you kind of it brings something out of you, or it does, like, once in every 5 times, once in every 10 times, you'll access something that you wouldn't have otherwise, even if it's, I don't know, like doing I used to have to write a lot of poems about well dressings when I was Derbyshire Poet Laureate, and sometimes you wouldn't think you were going to be able to do anything about Bakewell well dressing, and it was, but then you do find
Mind you signed up for Derbyshire Poet Laureate. You probably should have seen that coming.
Fantastic job. I even got to have a poem on a tea towel. It was great. Finest moment. So in terms of research, I'm really interested in how different writers approach the idea of research, but especially when you'd got sort of time pressure. How did you approach the problem of finding out about these creatures? Did you kind of ask them questions, university challenge style? Oh, and by the way, the thing that Glyn didn't say was that we have both been on university challenge, but he was a lot more successful than I was on this adventure in the history of poets going on university challenge. Yeah, how do you get to know these different creatures as you're researching them?
I want to go back to the one before, then I'll do that one, because I was thinking how. Yes, the writing a poem about a creature you know nothing about at first, and then you do know something about because you research it. It takes you to a place you didn't know you could go. But that's actually what I think form does. That's what rhyme does, or if you're not going to rhyme, that's what a stanza shape does. That's what metrics do. You know, it's what poetry is. To me, that's what verse is. It takes you out of what you would normally say in conversation or in prose. It just pressures you into something else. So the creatures were certainly functioning like that. In terms of research, basically my rule was like start with Wikipedia and find 2 interesting references from Wikipedia. I thought it has to be at least 2 other things, and it was roughly that. I'd look at the Wikipedia and then a couple of other sort of deeper drills, and sort of, here's the thing that snags my mind. This is the thing that's interesting here. This I can connect to what's going on in the world, or some principle of life, or the way humans are behaving. What I want this book to be, what I think in my happier moments it is a sort of panoramic. It's a portrait of us at this point, at this, which is anyone sort of my age who grew up with that sort of general sense that things were improving, and the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice and so on. This last decade has been really tough, and you realise it's not quite like that, and nothing's sure, nothing's safe. You know, I lived for 10 years in America. I yesterday cancelled a 3-week trip to America to do readings and everything because I don't trust the border anymore. I just don't trust it, and you know, that's a shocking thing to have to and a very surprising thing to reach 10 years after, or 15 years after having lived there. Yeah.
And I guess this is going back to what I call the McCaig quandary about the trap of anthropomorphism, and he never escapes it really. He kind of gets to this point where he's got this amazing facility with metaphor, and as I was trying to allude to, that's kind of all that we have to kind of bring. How else are we supposed to understand the more than human except in terms that we have? I sort of feel like it's not a bad thing that any kind of eco poem or something has the human enmeshed in it in some way. But I was interested in what you were saying at the beginning about wanting the creatures to come towards you rather than sort of vice versa, even though, you know, you set out with the goal of doing something, obviously. And that thing about the decision to write about, with, for, what do you feel you ended up doing when you kind of look back on it, having finished the project, in terms of that with for adjacent to kind of problem of how we write the more than human?
I think I ended up with of. You know, I wrote of them, but I think that the poems are all they're all human voices, and the cheap pun that I found as I would is to say that they have a frog in their throat. It's a human voice with a frog in the throat, a human voice impacted by the plight of the creatures, whatever creatures they are. Yeah. So I think it's probably of is the closest. I wrote it of them. It's a human voice that speaks of them and how to. So in a way, it's more like I think it's more like Birds, Beasts and Flowers of Lawrence than it is like Les Murray. It's not or McKay. It's not trying to voice them. I did try some of that at the start, and I haven't really run with any of those. And in fact, the first one I read was the 7th of the whole group, and it was just the idea of an annoyed dad in a car with his family and his kids in the background, and I just once I did that one, I thought this is how to do it. You do a human situation that is affected by what's going on, and then the thing about anthropomorphism and the appropriation argument, I suppose. What I'd set against that, in fact, you were saying that in your question. I think you were saying that. Anthropomorphism, largely thanks to Disney, probably is just regarded as irredeemable thing not to do. But then I think about eco-poetics, and I think about Theodore Roszak, and I think about what he said. This is in the 70s, 80s, about how the whole thing about eco-psychology is that it's the idea that you have, if you're talking about psychology, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, you have the idea that the answers to the way you are, whether the answers to the way you behave or your suffering and so on, can be found in your own life. That's the Freudian idea, right? That it's in your unconscious somewhere. And then you have the Jungian idea, which is that there's a collective unconscious, that it's a human thing. But the eco-psychology idea is that it's beyond human. It's like we a lot of the suffering relates to things before we even evolved. I mean, and I was thinking about that at the time I began these. I thought, what is when I look at stanzas on a page, I look at poems as stanzas on a page, and I think, well, what if that's footprints towards safety for an animal, or wing beats in the air or in the water? What if that? Because I say to my students, like, why I try to get them to write stanzaically is because once you see one stanza, if you see a footprint, then the next stanza has to be similar to it so that we know the same creature's there. But it doesn't have to be identical to it because the same creature's going through things. So it turns into something else. So I think certainly, I wouldn't say you always have to write stanzaically. You can write in blocks, you can write, there's all sorts of things you can do. But I think in terms of craft, try doing that. See what your imprint is. See what your creaturely imprint is on the ground. And so I think the whole of this lot, these poems, arise from that, arise from a metaphor about tread, about imprint. And I think the anthropomorphism thing just seems to me that we are, the whole eco-poetic thing is that we are closer to creatures. And my whole poetic pedagogy is we are closer to creatures. We need to be closer to what that's like. I mean, there are poems that have never left the language that are written by people from 500 years ago that if you break them down into imprint, they're basically saying, I'm sad and alone. I find someone. I'm not sad and alone. I am hungry. I find something, and now it's gone. So I'm hungry again. Those are the stanzas, right? Well, those are creatures. That's a creaturely progression. And I think the poems that survive are adjacent to that.
I'm trying not to extend the metaphor in my mind too far, because I've just been in Canada following bear prints that were leading to different points in the woods and disappearing. I was like, what happens when the footprints run out? Does that mean the bear's over there? Etc. etc. But very interested in that, in your work in general, the idea of the poem as print and the stanza as print, and footprint and creatureliness. If the poem through time is a kind of print or impression, whose prints are you walking in as you write? That's a really fancy way of just asking about influence, isn't it? I could just have asked who your influence is.
I was very deft. I think the big influences happen early for poets, I think. So when I first encountered, before I didn't read any contemporary poetry when I was a teenager, and I wanted to write like Byron, and so I was imitating Byron. So there wasn't much call for that in the 1980s. So I was trying to write like Byron, and then I went to Boston and was taught by Walcott, who said, "You know Auden?" Like as if I should have met him. And I said, "No, but I know of him," which is what Bart Simpson said about long division. I know of it. And then when Derek shamed me into not having read Auden when I was at university, I then read Auden from throughout and all of it. And then I just spent 5 years trying to write like him. And I think what I discovered then is that you can't write exactly like someone, but you can learn a lot about craft by really absorbing it. So you're in the shade of that tree, and then you move on. I mean, and I realised I just sounded like parody Auden, and I moved on. And then the same thing happened with Frost until I sounded like parody Frost, and then and now I suppose then I don't think as you get older you can have massively impactful influences. I think then it's just lots of things around you. But I don't know if I was told this when I was Walcott's student, but I developed it. But I just tell my students, whatever else you do, find a dead poet and a living poet that you love and learn all of it. Get the whole career. Figure out all of it. Read everything they did. A dead one and a living one, and I think that's a healthy kind of thing. You know, I have students who just never stop reading, and when I say to them, "You have a reading habit," I'm serious. They think I'm joking. It's like the way that some students sort of think you can't read too much, but you can. You know, it just becomes grey in your mind. It just becomes too much, and then you're just trying to attempt to be everyone. So I think find someone you love from long ago who's gone, and find someone who's still around. I like that.
And if anyone's already found their dead poet, but they're in the market to find a living poet, I'm just saying we're both alive and have books, if that is of interest.
Both alive.
The thing about the shade also makes me think of, and casting in the shadow of writers makes me think of McCaig again, and how he described a tree as being hugged by its own shadow. And the thing that fascinates me about him is he's always so doubting the thing that he's the best at. And that's fascinating that we often, I think sometimes as writers, it's almost like, I'm sure there's a psychological, psychotherapeutical parallel to this, but we kind of, we almost react against the thing that is most us, or that's most like us. I don't know if you've experienced that with your own work, when you're working with students, like the thing that you kind of hate is the thing that you do as a writer.
I just wanted to pick up on the McCaig thing. I loved what you said in the intro about that he hated metaphor. It's so hilarious to find that he thought that like that. Because I don't hate metaphor. I don't hate simile, but I'm not a big fan. And I tend to tell my students, like, just remember that when you use simile and metaphor, you are basically bringing something entirely different into your poem and saying, look at that instead of this, right? So don't listen to me, think of that. So if you don't do it well, and of course some people do it fantastically, and he did, but I want people to just have a little caution about it. And I think that's what's in his thing about about not liking metaphors because they're never quite exactly right. Because you can say his thing about the tree is absolutely brilliant in the moment, and then you think about it and say, well, it's sort of okay, and then, but there's not time because it moves on, right? And he was like that. But I mean, Craig Raine just did too many, and it stayed there for too long. But Walcott was great with that.
Really hoping that I was actually thinking about Craig Raine as you were talking about metaphor, and I was hoping that I wasn't going to think about his metaphors and I might get angry. Yeah, I think the thing about McCaig is this lack of trust in metaphor, and I think that the thing about its exactness and its inadequacy that really sums it up. I think Norman McCaig was interested in a kind of, and you've sort of talked about this tonight, a kind of what I'd call kind of panpsychism, the idea that we think through things that are extensions of us. We think through our environments and they become extensions of our consciousness. Yeah. I think he was quite sort of radical in the way he thought about consciousness, but he just came back to this dissatisfaction with being trapped by language. He kind of didn't want to have language. He wanted to be somewhere sort of beyond it. I'm in danger of using up all the question time by greedily asking my own questions. So I'm maybe going to ask a couple more, I think, and then we can see if anyone in the audience has them. So that's your kind of warning or invitation.
It's
sounds
nicer
than a
all,
warning.
They have to be as
think
good as
of
Helen's,
some questions. Otherwise, I'll just continue to ask lots more. Something that you've written about in terms of your teaching practice is this idea of spiralism. The spiral and the sense that things come back and that we encounter ideas sort of over and over again, but they're never quite the same, in the same way that you can't step into the same river twice, etc. I guess I'm just interested in that and how that might be creaturely in some sense, the idea of the spiral in teaching, in writing. What is spiralism? How does it influence your teaching practice?
Well, I think I've been influenced by reading a lot of Jung and Freud and Melanie Klein and so on, and just wanting to be able to give new names to things in italics and say, I thought of that, I mean, that's flip, but there's some truth in it. I would say, and it is creaturely to explain this. I think you know what the explanation is. I was thinking about Walcott's teaching, because he didn't speak from notes, he just talked. And when I encountered him, he was about the age I am now. He was a bit younger, actually, but he would just talk, and he would repeat himself. But he needed to, because I didn't understand it the first time, so it was quite good to hear it again with a slightly different take on it. And then a friend of mine was his student like 7 years later at Boston University, and she kept really good notes, which I hadn't done. And when I saw her notes, I kind of got it. I saw it all again, and I understood things I hadn't understood. And then with my own practice, I realized things, that he'd said. In my case, it was just the fact that because I don't write from teaching plans, and I don't, which is the equivalent older in life of not taking notes, I can't always remember if I've said something before. And so I started to think, let's think of a teaching practice that means I don't have to mind about that. And I found a really natural one, which is that actually, because my experience of being Derek's pupil and being desperate to hear what he wanted to say, is that I liked the fact things came round again, and that I got them a little bit more every time. So I'm not afraid of that in my class. I sort of, obviously I know what poems I'm going to teach. It's not completely free form, but I decided to call it spiralism, because I thought that was a nice way of looking at it. That spiraling can be a good thing. You completely forget what the last thing you heard about metaphor, and then you talk about imagery, or you talk about rhyme or rhythm or something, and then you eventually come back to it again, and there's some new idea. So that's all it is. It's basically it's an intellectual concept that's been hastily plastered over a creaturely failing, my fading memory, in order to make it sound, intended.
But that's kind of nice, in the same way that I think this goes back to the topic of anthropocentrism and anthropomorphism, and that thing about the intractable problem of the human, which, as I say, it kind of dominates the debate. Like, how do we get beyond the I remember thinking about this a lot when I was writing my first novel. It's my only novel, but I was writing in the voices of place, and then thinking, what gives me the right to sort of ventriloquize, like place because it's beyond human, but at the same time we're talking to other human beings. We're kind of and if writing is an act of empathy, then
Completely.
Why would it be strange to have empathy for places? And it's the same with the idea of enmeshing something in your teaching that comes from the fact that as we all talk, as we all teach, we are embodied, and there are things that are creaturely in our teaching as well.
And what gives you the right to speak in the voice of a place, or speak in the voice of a creature, or speak in the voice of another person who's not your age, or not your nation, or not your race, or not your religion, or whatever, that whole thing, is what gives you the right is if you've done the work, if you do it with love and research and hard work. If you don't do that, you don't have the right. You have to earn the right to do that, which I think is just simply a more nuanced question than it's being given credit for.
Yes, and we do all kind of get obsessed with the idea that you can speak, for example, for people who are in some way like you, we assume, but actually I'm in danger of going down the rabbit hole of my PhD, which is about neuroscience and poetry and ways of comprehending. But I remember going to a lot of lectures then with actual neuroscientists, like proper neuroscientists, where they were sort of doing experiments that showed that we quite literally see things all a bit differently. You know, there'd be a dot and be like, where is the dot? Everyone in the audience sees it differently. So even the idea that you might share things and that you could voice something is perhaps a bit of a fallacy. I think I should probably open to the floor for audience questions if anyone would like to ask one. And we might even have, it's my favourite name for anything, Roving Mike, because I always think it sounds like a troubadour or something. That Roving Mike is going to come round, and if you want to ask a question, please do. I think there's one at the back. Oh, loads of questions. Brilliant. Don't know where to begin. Susie.
Hello. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask about humour. And this question of how we can represent the more than human. And listening to you tonight perform, it really came across the use of characters, of irony, of sarcasm, and the vulnerability at the same time. And I wondered if you could say a bit about how you use that humour, where that comes from.
Thank you. That's kind of a lovely question. I think I don't trust work that doesn't have humour in it. I believe, I can be corrected by this, but I have a strong feeling that humour is connected with human and humus, meaning soil, and etymologically they're all connected. So I mean, I feel that writing without humour is hopeless in some way, literally hopeless, without hope. I think I may be a natural playwright. To be a playwright, I have written lots of plays and had some on, but to be a successful playwright, you have to be a hustler, and I'm not a hustler really. So, but I love writing plays, and I think it's part of it. It's just to have voices that are distinct, so that if somebody says something pompous, there's somebody next to them to undercut it and make fun of it. I mean, that's such a natural thing. That's such a Shakespearean thing. It's the heart of Shakespeare, isn't it? There's the subplots making fun of the main plot. So I totally cleave to that. So it's just natural to me. It's like I can't take one of the four humours for that long. I have to make fun of it with the other one. I mean, all the people I like are like that. They all smile, they laugh, and there's nothing more civilizing than laughter. You only have to look at some of the people in power in this world who are incapable of humour and see how absolutely frightening it is to not have that, to have no capacity to do that shrug, that sort of creaturely shrug at the world and say how mad it all is, and that's sustained so many great revolutions. Well, blah, blah, blah. That could go on for ages. But I really appreciate the question.
Also, self-deprecating statement of the night. I've written some plays and I've had a few plays put on. I think that's a bit of an understatement. But anyway, we shall move on to another question.
Good evening. Thank you so much. You've really inspired me. But if writing is such an act of empathy, how do we navigate when there is very little hope? Like, how do you navigate, you now in America? What's your plan, and can you give me a little bit of hope, please? I need a smidge.
The guy who just wussed out of flying to America. Well, one has to. I don't want to. Yeah. No, sure. Don't be distracted by it. Don't be distracted by it. You wake up in the morning and you have your own happiness and fear and worry and envies and joys and mercies, and you wake up with that. So don't be distracted from that by this. And don't, in a way, actually, perhaps, this is coming up a lot with students, because like everyone wants to write about the news, or they don't. So they either do or they don't. But if they do, it's too full on and it's too much. Or they don't, and then they feel like I should have done. But in fact, I think if you take deep breaths and you write about your soul, then it will come in. It will come in the vowels, it will come in the consonants, your pain will come in, the pain of what's going on. And I do think COVID changed us in that way. The personal, the global, the local, the national just seemed all to be happening at the same time. So don't just trust yourself. You can't, they can't stop that. It's horrible to watch. It's really horrible to witness. But then I suppose you remember that there's people witnessing worse, and have witnessed worse, and we've just I suppose I'm talking about, like, I don't want to speak for you, but like a sort of Anglophone creatures of a certain couple of generations, it just hasn't worked out like we thought it was going to work out, like it appeared to be working out. And I think we're dealing with that. We're dealing with that, but we will, because people are standing up in much more agony than we have. But we'll stand up. We'll stand up, and we should keep working.
Hi, I wanted to ask about, thank you for your wonderful reading, by the way. I very much enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask about doing a big project, because you set yourself quite a task with this. So this is sneakily two questions wrapped up in one. So firstly, I wanted to ask you about the sort of psychological weight of having set yourself a big project, and how you sort of dealt with that personally as a writer. And then secondly, when you were going along, how much you thought about variety of form, tone of voice, technique to get into each of the poems, about how sort of conscious or unconscious that was.
Yeah. Well, the first one, I love a project like that. I love that sort of thing. That is one of my creaturely symptoms. That's what I'm like. I love to have something that's going along below the surface that I can, 5 minutes into being awake, I can remember, oh yeah, that, I'm doing that. It's a lovely thing in the morning, to have that still going on. So that was all positive, that sense. And that's why I did it. I think that's why it wasn't like, maybe I'll write a little suite of 5 poems about, no, 101 by New Year's Eve. I don't know why I'm like that, but I'm moving towards psychotherapy, so maybe I'll find out. And the other one, I think that's a riotous joy to think, to go into it not thinking, okay, I have to make one of these a sestina. I did get in a sestina actually, and I don't like sestinas, but like I didn't think I had to do all the forms, but it was just suggested by the thing I'd thought of. And I was under pressure of time. I wake up early and wake up at 4 or 5, and I'd think, well, what do I know about the Fatu Hiva monarch? It's that it's a beautiful purple bird, and it's nearly extinct. And Trump just got in, Basically that's what's in my head when I start writing. And I trust, because I've been doing this for long enough, I trust the form to evolve. So some of them are rhymed, some of them are some of them are stanzaic, some of them aren't. Some of them are quite free, and some of them are ancient forms. You know, there's the odd, as I say, sestina and that kind of thing. So that was the joy of it, to think it could be anything. I like to think of, as a poet, I like to think of the room I work in as if it was an art studio, and there were canvases hanging around everywhere, and some were oils, and some were pastels, and some were watercolors, and some were ink. And I just love the idea that all the smell of the paint and all that. And I kind of wish my writing life could be like that. So I sort of imagine that and think, there's no one's. This is a life devoted to no one telling you what to do, isn't it? Really, you know. I'd say this little silly story, but I saw my daughter today, and she's not well, so I'll tell this for her. But I was dropping her off at school. She was probably about 11, and I was dropping her off at school, and she suddenly said, "Why do I have to go to school? Why do I have to go to school? It's all right for you. You can just go home and play." That's how she said it. You know, I mean, she might be younger, maybe 7 or 8. You just go home and play. And I said, "Well, I don't go home and play. I do my work. I read, and I have to meet people, and I have to sort of research and stuff." And I sort of just talk back like that. And she'd say, "I have to do physics." And I'd, "All right, yeah, but that's school. I have to do hard, difficult things as well." And I'd drop her off, and she went off to school. And I'm driving away in the car, and I'm like, "Ha! I actually can do what the fuck I want right now. I don't have to go to school. I love it." And that's how I treat my life as a poet. Although I do have to do things like show up and teach. That's why I'm moving towards a more responsible career as well.
Have we got any more questions? Or we're going to end on that glorious note of go. Yes.
May I? Thank you so much for coming here, Glyn. It's a pleasure. I just wanted to ask a slightly personal one. What was mid-90s America like with formalism? And
sorry?
What was mid-90s America like with formalism? And if you have any favorite poets you go back to often from that time?
So yeah, I lived in the States from mid-90s to mid-2000s. And it was a very strange kind of lull in history. Obviously, 9/11 happened, and I lived in New York for half of the time, so history was happening, but it also included people thinking that Clinton Lewinsky was like something the Senate had to vote on. So, I mean, there was a strange time. And I lived through that bridging. It was sort of 9/11 was right in the middle of it. In terms of poetry, well, language poetry, L equals A equals N equals G, that was a big deal. I couldn't make any sense of that, and I think I started to develop a kind of aesthetic argument against it, and for form, actually. I think when I went out there, I felt I'm a formalist, or people thought I was a formalist. Around the time of post 9/11, Iraq, Abu Ghraib, somebody wrote in a literary magazine that somebody called me and Armitage neocons because we rhymed. I'm serious. They called us neocons because we rhymed, right? So that bizarre connection of form in poetry with conservative thinking. I mean, it seems a long time ago, right? Because things are so screwed up now. Things are so weird. Who knows what people would say? But I just remember that because it seemed a real extreme that anyone who was seriously functioning in form in poetry was regarded as politically conservative. And that these people, the language poets, for example, I don't want to offend anybody, but this is how I saw it then. These people thought they were progressive and left-wing, and when in fact their stuff was pretty much incomprehensible and really elite, really impossible outside of the coteries on the university campuses. And I didn't think the publishing structure helped in America, where there were university presses. So a lot of people would be published by university presses, and it wasn't really exposed to the market because those universities are quite wealthy, or this was the case then. So a lot of people could get published on university presses. So it kind of perpetuated an aesthetic that I thought was really bogus and wouldn't reach anywhere outside of the campuses. That's how I felt it was. So it was quite a strange time. For a while I thought, I'm going to do an anthology of young American poets. I can because I'm not from America. And it would have been a terrible idea, and I wouldn't be talking to you now if I'd done that, because just the choices would have required, I don't know if you've noticed this about poetry in general, that no one makes anthologies anymore. They make anthologies about particular subjects. But when I was growing up, every generation had its, Motion and Morrison, and then the one after that, and the new poetry, the Blood Axe one. And it was every generation, every decade, it was like, this is the poetry of now. People have stopped doing that because no one feels they've got the spine to make a judgment on it, because so many people would hate them, And certainly America in the 90s would have been a terrible place and time to do it. So I came home safely, although I'm not allowed back in, obviously. Well, I'm too afraid to go back. But no, it was a weird time.
To be fair, one of the saddest moments of my aspiring poetry career was being rejected from some Blood Axe anthology. I think it was called New Blood or something.
It's always called New Blood.
And I was like, that's
it's always got blood in the title.
I've got no hope now. And it nearly thwarted. It could have saved the world a lot of poetry because I might not have carried on. But somehow I did. Thank you for these wonderful questions. I think we're getting towards the end of the evening now, sadly. Although we could hear poems for twice as long, it would be marvellous. Thank you so much to all of you. Millions of thanks to do, actually. So thank you to Nikolai Duffy and Andrew McMillan from the Poetry Research Group. Thanks to David Cooper, Centre for Place Writing. Thank you to Becky Swain and Martin and Kay from the Poetry Library for being so amazing. Thank you to James Draper, who's here too, and everybody who's helped to make this evening possible. You can find the full Poetry Library events brochure on the website. It's such a beautiful programme. The artwork is amazing, and more importantly, full of wonderful events that are coming up. In terms of this series, this is the first of a 3-part series that will look at these ideas around poetry and ecology, and hopefully lead to some more thought-provoking conversations. Tonight certainly has been. So the next event will be on the 29th of May with the former Canal Poet Laureate Roy Macfarlane, who I'm hoping will know some things about herons, because he writes poems about herons, but I promise not to make the whole night themed around that. And then on June 19th, we've got the wonderful Isabel Galleymore and Hannah Copley, both of whom write fantastic work. So please do come along to those and to all the other wonderful events that are happening here. Thank you to everyone for doing the tech, and to Sam for making the hybrid audience who've joining us via tech. Hope you've enjoyed the evening as well. But most importantly, thanks to all of you for coming, and big round of applause and thank you to Glyn Maxwell. Thank you.